Hello, I'm Babita Sharma. Welcome to Outside Source. There's another stark warning from the World Health Organization about the coronavirus pandemic. Its Director General is warning of 10 million infections and 500,000 deaths by next week.
The virus thrives on division, but is thwarted when we unite.
We look at the situation across Europe amid warnings that the continent faces a resurgence of COVID-19 as lockdown restrictions are relaxed. As the UK experiences its hottest day of the year, a major incident is declared on England's south coast after hundreds of thousands of people head to beaches. And we'll speak to the lawyer of George Floyd's family as US politicians prepare to vote on a sweeping police reform bill. Welcome. Thanks very much for joining us. The head of the World Health Organization has given another stark reminder that the world will not move past the coronavirus pandemic anytime soon. The number of the cases is accelerating in the Americas, as well as in parts of Europe, the Middle East and Central Asia. The WHO warns that if it's left unchecked, it will push health systems to the brink once again.
In the last month, almost 4 million cases have been reported. We expect to reach a total of 10 million cases and 500,000 deaths within the next week.
Well, let's focus on Europe, and the WHO has warned people in the region to not be complacent. Here's its regional director.
The region continues to report close to 20,000 new cases and over 700 new deaths daily. Last week, Europe saw an increase in weekly cases for the first time in months.
The WHO says 30 countries in Europe have seen increases in new cumulative cases over the past 2 weeks. It adds that in 11 of those countries there has been a very significant resurgence. But that news isn't stopping parts of Europe from continuing to open up. Like this in Paris, something we haven't seen for 3 months. Visitors at the Eiffel Tower. It reopened today to a small group of visitors and, well, they had to make their way using the stairs right up to the top as the lifts are too small to safely social distance. The managing director says lifts will reopen at 20% of normal capacity next month.
Today it's like a big party, a wedding party for us, because we prepared for months and months. I decided in 3 hours to close the Eiffel Tower. But to reopen the Eiffel Tower, it was a big challenge. And with my team, we managed to do that. And now today, it's a day to enjoy, it's a day to relax.
So the Eiffel Tower has reopened in a very controlled way, but the level of control is harder to implement in some public spaces. This Bournemouth Beach in Dorset County on England's south coast today. It's the hottest day of the year so far in the UK, and that means huge crowds of people have flocked to the beach. Well, officials say 500,000 people visited Dorset today from other counties, and that authorities are struggling to cope with the crowds. Here's a tweet from the local Member of Parliament, Tobias Ellwood. Major incident declared in Bournemouth. Please stay away. With 500,000 visitors and Dorset roads are gridlocked, hindering emergency vehicles, and beaches are full. I've asked Police Minister to dispatch additional police if Dorset requires. Well, here's more from Mr. Ellwood.
We need to recognise that this is still an enduring emergency, and it's very sad to see a number of people being so selfish, but also acting dangerously as well. We've got to bear in mind the effort that we've made to get to where we are today. We've done well to get through the peak, but all of that could be so easily undone if we see a second spike.
Well, that's a view shared by many across the UK. James Moore, writing in The Independent, went as far as to say the scenes on Bournemouth Beach make Britain look like the jackass of the world. His article's been widely shared on Facebook. It's worth remembering more than 40,000 people have died from COVID-19 in the UK so far. That figure rose by 149 today, while more than 1,000 new cases have been recorded in the past 24 hours. There's concern the gatherings in Bournemouth might lead to a second spike in the infection rate. England's Chief Medical Officer Chris Whitty tweeted this evening, "If we do not follow social distancing guidance, then cases will rise again. Naturally, people will want to enjoy the sun, but we need to do so in a way that is safe for all." But some beachgoers defended their actions, saying they tried to practice social distancing while out and about.
And, I mean, do you feel safe coming down today?
I feel absolutely fine.
Yeah, fine, really. As long as people stay away from us and the 2 metre rule, then
As long as you're in your group and that and you're 2 metres, I feel absolutely fine with it.
If people get too close, they'll probably say, can you move over a little bit?
Right now, the restaurants are closed, the bars are closed, the attractions are closed. You can't play crazy golf, you can't go in the arcade, you can't do any of the fabulous things we've got available. So after 4th of July, those people can be spread around those various activities. Also, hotels will be open, so hotel car parks are open, so there's other places for people to park. Right now, it's just not enough facilities here, and so it's kettling everybody to the beach, and that's causing a lot of problems.
People in the UK may soon be able to travel to some places in Europe without having to quarantine for a fortnight when they return to the UK. In the next few days, the government is expected to announce so-called travel corridors with countries including Spain, France and Germany. For now, the Foreign Office still advises against non-essential travel abroad. Damon Grammaticus reports from the Costa del Sol on what Spanish resorts may look like when the tourists return.
On the Costa del Sol, it's already holiday season. No international tourists yet, but when air corridors open, this is what you'll find. New COVID-19 wardens enforcing social distancing. 3,000 have been hired for Spain's southern beaches. You have to leave a clear path to the sea, 1.5 meters between people. Only family members allowed to sit together with no more than 2 umbrellas.
The biggest problem we might have will be groups of people. At the moment, it's 15 people maximum. Also, if people can't keep a safe distance, they should wear masks.
And in hotels too. The numbers allowed in swimming pools will be restricted. The rooms are now bare, just a sanitised TV remote. Anything you might touch has been removed. In the restaurant, diners must wear gloves. There are no menus, instead a code to scan on your phone. And every hour, surfaces are disinfected. But despite this, they're only seeing cancellations, not bookings here from overseas customers. Last year, the Costa del Sol welcomed 10 million visitors. Air corridors might bring some back, but how many?
Damon Grammaticus with that report. Now let's turn to Washington, where lawmakers are debating a bill sparked by the outcry over the deaths of Black Americans at the hands of police. The legislation to tackle police brutality was put forward by the Democrats in the House of Representatives with a vote that's expected later. And this is all taking place on a backdrop of events marking 1 month since the death of George Floyd. Well, Democrats have been putting their case to the media. Here's Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee.
The George Floyd Justice in Policing Act is not a figment of our imagination. It's not an idea that we just wanted to exhibit our proudness of the law. But this legislation is America's legislation. It is a patriotic stance that says that we all are created equal under the law, and we are not to be denied that equality.
Anthony Zerka is monitoring the developments for us in Washington. Unity is not a word that we use often at the moment in the Senate or in the House of Representatives. Anthony, what's your take on what's going on here?
I think it was always going to be a challenge to get something through Congress, a divided Congress, particularly during an election year, just 4.5 months away from the presidential election. I think the key sticking point, as you highlighted here, was whether to compel local police departments to reform or to use incentives, as the Republicans want, to try to coax them to do things like banning chokeholds by withholding federal funds or offering additional federal funds for them to reform. So we have 2 different ways of looking at tackling police reform in 2 different chambers of Congress. And right now, at least, there doesn't seem to be a lot of room to compromise or a lot of willingness to. I think both sides may want to take this issue to the voters in November.
And is that how long that we'll have to wait, Anthony, for any kind of resolution as to what's going to happen with the police bill?
Well, you got to remember, we're not only electing a new president in November here, we're also electing an entirely new House of Representatives and a little more than a third of the Senate. All of those chambers and the president will be sworn in at the beginning of next year. So if nothing gets done now, and it looks increasingly likely that nothing is going to get done, then we'll have to look to January, February of next year with a new Congress and possibly a new president to make efforts on reform when this logjam, this divided government, could be broken.
Anthony Zerka speaking to me earlier. Stay with us here on Outside Source, still to come. New satellite images suggest China has built new structures near the site of recent clashes between Indian and Chinese troops in the Galwan Valley. The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has sacked his Shadow Education Secretary Rebecca Long-Bailey for sharing an article which contained what Labour described as anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. She had retweeted an interview with the actor Maxine Peake, in which Ms Peake discussed the death of George Floyd and suggested that police had learnt the tactic of kneeling on necks from the Israeli Secret Services. Ms Peake has since said this is inaccurate. Ms Long-Bailey was asked to delete her tweet but chose not to. She later said she had not meant to endorse all aspects of the article. Here's Sir Keir Starmer.
Well, the sharing of that article was wrong, and because the article contained anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and I have therefore stood Rebecca Long-Bailey down from the Shadow Cabinet. I've made it my first priority to tackle anti-Semitism, and rebuilding trust with the Jewish community is a #1 priority for me.
This is Outside Source live from the BBC Newsroom. Our headline for you this hour: the World Health Organization has warned that the death toll from the coronavirus will reach 500,000 by next week and that there will be 10 million infections. The United Nations says police forces around the world should stop using facial recognition technology on people attending peaceful protests. Technology like the system that you can see here scans faces in a crowd and matches them with identities stored on a database. Police forces say it helps them spot wanted criminals, but the UN has other concerns.
Facial recognition, though, constitutes a paradigm shift. It dramatically increases the capacity to identify and track all or many participants in an assembly in an automated fashion and sometimes in real time. At the same time, facial recognition today remains prone to errors. That means in this context that misidentification could lead to wrongful arrests, for example, or prosecutions.
The United Nations says the technology could violate demonstrators' rights to peaceful assembly and deter people from exercising their democratic right to protest. The technology is already being used. This is Cardiff here in the UK. Welsh police have deployed these vans at international rugby games and pop concerts, but also at demonstrations. On a much bigger scale, in Hong Kong last year, protesters from the democracy movement went to huge lengths to avoid being identified, shining lasers onto police lines, as you can see, in an effort to confuse any scanners that might be there. Well, this group went a step further, chopping down a camera mast. Then they stamped on it and used some sort of liquid to disable it. The authorities say these are traffic cameras, but protesters believe they're for surveillance. Well, most recently, the issue came up in the US too, in a huge wave of protests following the death of George Floyd. Several tech companies, including Microsoft and IBM, said they would stop selling facial recognition systems to police forces as intense scrutiny fell on policing methods across the board. Imogen Fuchs in Geneva has got more on the UN's recommendation.
So this report from the UN Human Rights Office, it comes at a really interesting time because obviously we've seen over the past few weeks Black Lives Matter demonstrations right around the world and allegations of excessive police intervention, excessive use of force. Now, what the UN was looking particularly at here is the kinds of things that law enforcement agencies use around demonstrations. Facial recognition is one of them. In a quite surprising move, the UN has said, don't just control it, it wants a moratorium on the use of facial recognition at peaceful protests. It says governments really need to, first of all, guarantee how and why that data is being used, and that people's civic rights and human rights are protected when it's used. Also says demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations, should not be recorded anyway, that there isn't a need for law enforcement officers to do that.
Imogen Fuchs there. Next, a new development on that deadly confrontation between Indian and Chinese troops in the Galwan Valley earlier this month. These new satellite images suggest China has built new structures near the site of the clash, which left 20 Indian troops dead. The two countries are holding talks to defuse tensions, though both sides still accuse the other of breaking agreements. Many questions still remain about exactly what happened. Ross Atkins has been taking a close look at the story that's captured the world's attention.
We know something happened in the mountains of disputed Kashmir. No shots were fired, but soldiers clashed and died. There are claims brutal, basic weapons were used. Two nuclear powers were in hand-to-hand combat, and both blame the other. So what happened on the India-China border? And why does it matter so much? It's 45 years since the last deadly clash between India and China on this border. 45 years. So what changed? Well, the pressure was building. This is the Galwan Valley. It sits on the border, which you can see identified there as the line of actual control, the LAC. There are troops on either side of it, and the territory around the LAC is still disputed. One recent example is India's upgrading of its infrastructure, to China's irritation. Now, this border's always been about managed tension. But that tension reached a breaking point. This is India's version of events. It says the Chinese sought to erect a structure in the Galwan Valley on our side of the LAC. More recently, India said these satellite images of construction in the border area are proof of China breaking the rules. But then there's China's story. It sees things quite differently.
印方部队严重违反双方共识，越线非法活动。 并对中方人员进行挑衅攻击，导致双方边防部队发生严重肢体冲突。
Whatever the reason, both agree that something happened. China says it was fierce and physical. One Indian officer told the BBC, "They hit our boys on the head with metal batons wrapped in barbed wire. Our boys fought with bare hands." And an Indian official passed this image to the BBC, claiming these are Chinese weapons. And if you're wondering why this involved hand-to-hand combat, it's because of a deal back in the 90s that banned guns or explosives near the border. So they fought in a different way. Precisely how, though, we can't know because there's no footage. So if you've seen lots of videos being shared on social media, like this one, or this one, they aren't of this clash. What are real are videos like this of funerals in India. It says 20 of its soldiers died, and claims China lost men too. For its part, China has a policy of not commenting on military casualties. So precisely why this escalated on June the 15th, we still don't really know. But these are two neighbouring global powers constantly jockeying for position. And at this part of the border, the past matters too.
They fought a war over this patch of land back in 1962, a war in which China essentially rapidly defeated India, and that has been a historical trauma for India in subsequent decades.
Prime Minister Modi may not call it a historical trauma, but he's aware there's an appetite for India to assert itself.
हमारे लिए भारत की अखंडता और संप्रभुता सर्वोच्च है.
And look at these pictures from Uttar Pradesh. That's an effigy of President Xi. Whether by design or not, the Hindu nationalism that fuels Modi's political power is firing up. Some see Modi standing up to China, some say he's not done enough, others see ulterior motives. One Bengali newspaper says of him and his party, country and patriotism is only a political weapon for them. There's also the Chinese suggestion that for India, this is a national inferiority complex playing out. Have a look at this from the editor-in-chief of the state-backed Global Times. He says the fact is India can't beat China militarily and its weak economy isn't able to sanction China. Don't bluff and stop pushing more Indian soldiers to risk their lives, he says. But what about China's motives? Certainly after the event, it wants to be seen as fair but powerful. These pictures are from state media. We're told this is recent footage of a high-altitude military drill. And consider this. As this Indian journalist notes, the Chinese media broadly buries news of the worst clash on the India-China border for years, he argues. And it's true, the government and the media has largely not wanted to get into the detail, nor ramp up the rhetoric, which points to a difference. While neither may have really wanted this to happen, once it had done, for China it became a moment to reference its military superiority. That is a message for India. For India, well, it wants to be seen to stand up to the Chinese. That's, of course, a message for China, but also for Indians and for a watching world. Though, disappointingly for India, that watching world has shown little interest in getting involved. And while we may never know precisely what happened on that cold June night in the mountains, that men died is proof of how high the stakes are for India and China and how their rivalry will shape the region for years to come.
Ross Atkins with that report. Next, we're going to show you some extraordinary scenes in East Africa where huge swarms of locusts are eating through crops and threatening food supplies. It's the second time this year that farmers' livelihoods have come under attack from the insects. And the United Nations is warning this latest wave could be even more destructive. Anne Soy has this report from Kenya, where locust trackers are on the front line in the fight back.
Mini devourers on the move. They advance like an army, eating every plant on their path. Francis Ekiru watches helplessly as locusts destroy his crop.
It is cleared. My green gram has been cleared.
His has been a model farm. As the agricultural officer here in Turkana County, he invites his neighbors and shows them how to grow food. But this is a challenge he's never had to deal with.
This is a disaster, which it will affect not me alone. There's other farm also chewed there, another one there, another one there. So in something like in 2 days, all these farms will be finished. There's nothing. This is what we call poverty.
Each locust can eat its own body weight daily. And together in a swarm, they consume as much food in a day as 2,500 people would in a year. These are hopper bands, young locusts that aren't flying yet. They are most destructive at this stage of growth. And when they start flying, they can move up to 150 kilometers in a day. Tracking them is a difficult task.
So we've come to spot them and send the coordinates.
But volunteers like Albert Lemasulani are supporting efforts to control the locusts. He took us to one of the biggest swarms he's ever seen.
Wow, what a spectacular sight. I've never seen anything like this. Millions upon millions of locusts everywhere. Look at that tree. They've completely taken over. You can barely see the leaves. They're eating them. And once they're done and they fly away, it will be left bare.
Albert has now trained teams he works with to collect information on the ground. They feed it through an app to the control center run by the Kenyan government and the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. With the GPS coordinates from the trackers, pilots of spray planes are then able to go to specific areas infested with locusts to apply pesticides. And the ground team would often be there to confirm the location.
We've been trying to track the swarm using aerial surveillance yesterday, and today the coordinator have sent the spraying planes. We are waiting for the spraying plane to spray this swarm.
Albert is the new hero in his community. The Samburu are pastoralists. Livestock here means everything.
Even if you have millions in bank account and you don't have animals, you don't have a homestead like this one, nobody recognizes you. The people will not recognize the billions in the bank. What they recognize is what do you have, like the cows, the camels, the animals, those things.
They call him the locust man. Albert had tracked the migrant locusts and the first Kenyan generation.
The eggs already.
the eggs.
He then filmed the second one hatching, an incredibly rare thing to see, but also a sign they may not be winning the fight. If nothing is done, each time they breed, they multiply by at least 20, inching ever closer to becoming a plague. And watching the devastation locusts are causing in farms like Francis's, Albert worries about what the future holds. Anne Soy, BBC News.
Just before we go, I want to tell you about a 114-year-old Eritrean man who contracted COVID-19. He's been discharged from hospital in Addis Ababa and sent back home. He was first treated after suffering breathing difficulties back in February, but has since made a full recovery from the coronavirus. The hospital's chief executive announced the man's recovery on his Facebook page. Good news for a change. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you again soon. Goodbye.